She stood outside that door with a bag of warm rice in her hand and a heart about to break in her chest, while the man she had spent 3 years of her life heard his voice, cold as a knife. "Marry him? I'd rather burn down my entire fortune." Seoul glittered below like a city built of lies. And Lena Vale, the woman who had sacrificed everything for love, finally realized the cruelest truth wasn't betrayal. It was that she had never truly existed in his eyes. If you want to know what happens when a woman disappears from the clutches of the most powerful man in Seoul, and that man is willing to burn down the city to find her, then stay until the end of this story. Press like so I know you're here, and comment the name of the city you're watching. I want to know how far my story has traveled in this world. The rain in Seoul doesn't fall gently. It poured down as if the sky were deliberately punishing someone. Heavy, noisy, and without warning. The raindrops hitting the skyscraper's glass created a sound like static, like interference, like the signal of something slowly dying. Lena Vale stood in front of the elevator on the 42nd floor of the penthouse, clutching a clear plastic bag containing a steaming hot box of japchae. Rain had soaked through her coat since she walked from the parking lot into the lobby. Her hair was wet, her cheeks were cold, but she stood there, her fingers gripping the bag strap tightly, a faint smile playing on her lips. The kind people often make when trying to appear normal despite the turmoil within. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor. The hallway leading to Adrian Kwon's penthouse was paved with white marble, and soft yellow light filtered through recessed ceiling lights. She had walked down this hallway hundreds of times. She knew every tiny scratch on the brass doorknob. She knew how her footsteps echoed on the cold stone. But something is different tonight. Voices echoed from inside. Men's voices. Many of them. Bursts of laughter as if someone had just finished telling a very funny story. She stopped at the door. Her hand touched the thick wooden surface. She didn't knock. For some reason, she didn't type. Perhaps it was because the laughter inside sounded so natural, so relaxed, the kind of relaxedness that only comes when no women are present, the kind of relaxedness men have when talking about things they would never say in front of others. Adrian's voice rang out clearly without any hesitation. "Don't talk nonsense. I never intended to do that." Someone asked again. Lena didn't hear the question clearly. She only heard Adrian's voice, deep and cold, the coldness of someone who doesn't need to raise their voice because they know they'll be heard whether they whisper or shout. "Marry her?" His voice paused for a beat, as if considering whether the statement was funny enough. "I'd rather burn down my entire fortune than do that." Laughter erupted. Lena couldn't breathe. It wasn't because she wasn't prepared for the bad. In 3 years with Adrian Kwon, she had prepared herself for many bad things. She had learned to breathe when being scolded in front of others, learned to look down at the floor when being compared, learned to put on a mask when necessary. But she hadn't learned to stand tall when she heard her voice completely erased by such a calm remark. "She's beautiful," Adrian continued, his voice unwavering. "Obedient, knows her place. But those things are only useful when you need something temporary. She was never part of my long-term plans." Someone else said something, in a lower voice she didn't catch. But Adrian answered immediately, as clearly as if reading from a pre-printed text. "She thinks this is love. Let her think. People work better when they believe in something." She stood there. The japchae pouch in her hand was no longer steaming, or perhaps she no longer noticed the warmth from it. Seoul sparkled through the window at the end of the hallway. Millions of yellow, white, and blue lights flickering like the veins of a giant body that never sleeps. She used to love that look. She used to stand in front of this penthouse window and think she was a part of that dazzling spectacle. Now it just looks like a fake painting. She placed the japchae bag down on the marble floor, gently, without making a sound. Then she turned, stepped into the elevator, and pressed the first floor button. The elevator doors closed. She looked in the elevator mirror, her own face reflected back, wet hair clinging to her cheeks, her eyes still not tearful because her brain hadn't yet processed what she'd just heard into an acceptable reality. She looked at the woman in the mirror and, for the first time in 3 years, she didn't recognize her. Who is that? A woman drenched in rain with matted hair, pale hands, and empty eyes, standing in an expensive elevator in Seoul at 11 o'clock at night? Who is that? The elevator opened on the first floor. She stepped out. She walked through the dealership lobby, past the security guard who nodded to her as usual, past the automatic revolving glass doors, then out, into the rain, and straight ahead. No look back. No stopping. No taxi. Just go. Until the rain soaked through my skin. Zara Quinn realized something serious was happening the moment there was a knock on her apartment door in the middle of the night. It wasn't because Lena occasionally visited late, that wasn't unusual. It was because the knocking lacked rhythm. It was irregular, as if the person knocking wasn't sure what they were doing, wasn't sure if this was the place to be. Zara is open. Lena stood there, soaked from head to toe, with no umbrella, no bag, nothing. Just her clothes dripping water onto the floor, and a gaze that reminded Zara of the time she looked into the eyes of a cat that had just been hit by a car on the road. Still alive, still looking, but no longer there. "Come in." Zara pulled her inside. "He said I was never part of his long-term plans." Zara said nothing. She took a towel from the bathroom, gave it to Lena, and then heated some water. "He said I'm easy to manage." Lena sat down on the sofa, towel in hand but not wiping. "He said I know my place. He said people work better when they believe in something." Her voice was frighteningly calm, the calm of someone who had moved past the other side of a shock and hadn't yet found their normal emotions. "I am that something, Zara." Zara placed a cup of hot water on the table in front of Lena. Who was he talking to? His men, in the penthouse. "I'm standing outside the door." Lena looked down at her glass of water. "I brought him japchae. He likes japchae in the evening. I bought it from his regulars in Mapo. It took 45 minutes to get there." 45 minutes. Zara sat down opposite Lena, looked her straight in the eye. "We need to have a serious talk." "I know. It's not the kind of a conversation where you say, 'He's terrible, let's break up.' I'm talking about the kind of conversation where you disappear, really disappear." Lena was silent for a very long time. Outside the window, the rain continued to beat against the glass. Seoul is never silent. Even at midnight, there are car horns, people. The sound of the city breathing. "He'll find me," Lena finally said. "I know, that's why we have to do this the right way." They stayed awake all night. No time to cry. There was no time for tears. Zara, who had worked for 3 years at a cybersecurity firm before quitting and opening a small cafe in Hongdae, understood better than anyone what disappearing from Adrian Kwon's network truly meant. She had seen what happened to those who had tried to escape before. She'd heard it from Lena, heard hints at parties, read about it in news reports that never mentioned Adrian's name but bore his fingerprints as clear as his signature. Zara started deleting the listings, Lena's social media accounts, not completely deleted because a sudden disappearance would trigger an alert. Instead, Zara reset all access permissions, changed the linked IP address, replaced the profile picture with a different one, and adjusted the login history to appear normal. Changed the phone number. Canceled credit cards. Not canceled, but blocked, because sudden cancellation is also a signal. Withdrawn cash. Not all of them, because withdrawing all the money from the account is also a signal, enough for 3 months. "You need to learn how to leave no trace," Zara said, her fingertips tapping rapidly on the keyboard. "Not just digitally, physically too. Don't take the same route twice. Don't buy food at the same place 2 days in a row. Don't look at the cameras." "I know all that." Lena sat at the kitchen table holding a cup of now cold coffee. "You learn by watching movies. That's different from learning by living." Lena didn't object. As dawn approached, Zara stood up, looked at the screen one last time, then looked at Lena. "I can't go with you. I'll stay here, continue doing everything normally so they won't suspect you've been helped." Zara's voice didn't tremble, but Lena realized her friend was holding back something. "But I need you to promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't go back because you miss him. Don't go back because you're lonely. Don't go back because he called and his voice sounded different." Zara looked straight into Lena's eyes. "He will call and his voice will sound very different. He's good at that." Lena put her coffee cup down. "I promise. Go." As the first rays of dawn touched the eastern buildings of Seoul, Lena Vale was nowhere to be found. She rented a motel room in Noan with cash and a different name. Not a carefully prepared fake name, just a random one she'd read from the laundromat sign across the street when the receptionist asked. The motel room was narrow, its pale yellow walls stained with age, the window overlooking an alley filled with trash cans and stray cats. The bed sheet smelled strongly of bleach. She sat on the edge of the bed in her wet clothes, not yet having changed. And for the first time since midnight, she cried. She wasn't crying because of Adrian, or not entirely because of Adrian. She was crying because of the woman she saw in the elevator mirror, the woman who had spent 3 years waking up every morning and deciding that her love was enough to fill a void the other woman had no intention of filling. She was crying because she was smarter than this. She knew it. She used to know it, but she chose not to know. And now she sits in a motel in Nowon at 6 in the morning with nothing but a little cash and wet clothes, while the man she served for 3 years is still sleeping in his penthouse bed, completely unaware that everything has changed. She wiped her eyes. She stood up. She walked into the cramped bathroom. There was no mirror in this bathroom. Someone had taken it down. Only a faint rectangular mark remained on the wall where the mirror used to hang. She stood before the empty space, stared into the void, and then turned on the cold water. On the 42nd floor, Adrian Kwon woke up at 7:30 as usual every morning. Red bean porridge and toast were already prepared on the dining table by his private servant. He sat down, glanced at his phone screen, reading the morning financial report sent by 3 different directors. He drank coffee, black, unsweetened, as he didn't like sweets, and looked out the window at the city waking up below. It wasn't until 15 minutes later, when the penthouse cleaning staff walked into the hallway and returned with a silly question about the bag of food left outside the door the night before, that Adrian understood something had happened. He called Lena. No reply. Call back. No reply. He put the phone down, stared at the black screen for a moment, then called someone else. Find her. Lena exists in ways that people don't notice. She took a part-time job at a laundromat in Nowon. Not because the laundromat was hiring, but because she walked in, told the elderly owner straight up that she needed a job and would do a better job than anyone he'd ever hired. And he looked at her face long enough to realize she was telling the truth. Every day she walks to the laundromat via a different route, eats breakfast at different restaurants, pays with cash, doesn't use her phone in public, doesn't look directly at security cameras, wears her baseball cap pulled low over her face. She slept 4 to 5 hours a night. The rest of the night she lay staring at the motel ceiling, listening to the city outside, and trying not to think about what would happen next. The first week was the worst, not because of danger, but because of the silence inside her head. For 3 years, her life had been organized around another person, his schedule, his moods, his interests. Even her thoughts had gradually learned to revolve around him like a planet around the sun, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way to survive in that orbit without being thrown out. There is no longer an orbit. And she didn't know how to stand upright when there was nothing to turn around. Cassian Rhee appeared in her life like most truly dangerous things appear, completely normally, without any warning. It was a Tuesday evening. She was sitting in a small underground jazz club in Hapjeong, the kind of place with no sign, only accessible to those who knew each other, with dim yellow lights and the smell of coffee mingled with cigarette smoke despite the cold outside. Lena chose this place because it had no cameras, didn't accept credit cards, and the music was loud enough so no one could hear the conversation at the next table. She sat in the corner, drinking coffee and looking up at the small stage where a man was playing the saxophone alone. Then someone sat down in the chair opposite her. She didn't invite me. She looked up and saw Cassian Rhee. She knew him, known him from 3 years alongside Adrian. Cassian was the one behind Adrian in every meeting, always silent unless asked, always observing while others spoke. People called him the Shadow, not because he was weak, but because he never needed to make a fuss to let others know he was there. Her heart sank. "I'm not following you," Cassian said before she could say anything. His voice was low, unhurried, like someone speaking normally. "I came here because I'm familiar with this place. I didn't know you were here." She looked at him, assessing him. "Now you know." "I know." He looked up at the stage, not at her. "And I won't tell him." "Why should I believe you?" Cassian was silent for a moment. The saxophone player on stage was sustaining a high note that seemed to go on forever. "You don't have to believe me," he finally said. "Just sit here and have your coffee. When I leave, I'll leave. No one will know I met you." Lena didn't leave. partly because if she got up and walked out right now, it would look like confirmation she was hiding, and if anyone was watching from outside, that was something she didn't want them to see. Another part, the part she hated herself for, was that in the past 3 years, no one had sat in front of her and started with, "I won't tell him." The music continued, the warmth of the cafe spread. "How's he finding me?" she asked after a pause. Her voice was flat, revealing nothing. Cassian turned to look at her for the first time since sitting down. His gaze, she remembered noticing it before, that Cassian Rhee had a kind of look not often seen in people in Adrian's world. Not cold, not calculating, just attentive. A genuine kind of attention, not the kind people feign to gather information. "The entire network down the street is operational," he said. 24 employees. Camera footage from that night. Your phone was monitored until it lost signal in Mapo at midnight. He paused. "You're more capable than I thought. You don't think I'm good at anything?" "No," he admitted. He never said she was good. "But I observed her." She looked at him. "What are you observing?" "Everything," he said without embarrassment. "You learn a lot when you stand in the corner and say nothing." Yeah. After that night, Lena changed motels, changed areas, changed her schedule. But a week later, Cassian reappeared, this time in a used bookstore in Insadong Alley. She was flipping through a book when she heard his voice from the bookshelf next to hers. "She's being followed by someone named Park Soo-ho. He'll report back tomorrow morning if he doesn't find anything before midnight tonight." She didn't look over the bookshelf. "Do I know how to get out?" "Towards the back gate. There's an alley leading to Gyeongbokgung Palace. From there, take the train towards Dobongsan." A brief silence. "Why did you do this?" On the other side of the bookshelf, she heard him turn a page. "Because the woman sitting outside the door and listening to that story should never have had to hear it." She put the book down and walked towards the back gate. Us. The following weeks were a strange kind of existence that Lena had no words to describe. By day she worked, by night she moved. Every few days there was a message from Zara, not via phone but through a signaling system they had agreed upon the first night, so silly that no one could guess it without prior knowledge. A random comment on an anonymous social media account about the weather. Heavy rain meant he was stressed and in danger. Sunny meant he was in control. Stormy meant to run. For 4 consecutive weeks, Zara sent a message saying, "It's raining a lot." Then one day, Cassian found her on the banks of the Han River at sunset, the most deserted spot in Seoul at that hour. Enough people to not seem out of place, enough noise so no one could hear them. He knows why she left. Lena looked out at the river. The evening light faded on the water's surface. Mean. That means someone told him about the japchae bag left at the door. He figured out the rest. Cassian stood beside her, also looking out at the river. He no longer sees her as the one who left. Now he sees her as someone who witnessed what he said. How are they different? Those who leave can be coaxed to return. His voice didn't change, but there was something heavier in it. Those who witnessed it must be controlled. Lena continued to gaze at the river. The lights from the Banpo Bridge began to come on, reflecting on the water in shimmering streaks of color. "So what should we do?" Cassian turned to look at her. And this time, for the first time, she looked back. "I have an idea," he said. "But it might make things worse before they get better." The Han River continued to flow beneath them, silently and indifferent to everything. "Go ahead and speak." That was the moment Lena Vale truly entered the most dangerous part of this story. Not the night she stood outside the penthouse door, not the morning she fled into the rain. It was the moment she stood by the Han River at sunset and said, "Tell me," to the man she knew she shouldn't trust, yet had begun to trust without realizing it. And as Cassian Rhee began to explain his plan to her, Lena understood one thing very clearly. Whether she agreed or disagreed, there was no way out of here without passing through fire. The only question is whether she will walk through it or be burned alive in it. Cassian didn't look at her as he spoke. He gazed out at the river, his hands in his coat pockets, his shoulders slightly slumped in the manner of someone about to say something they weren't even sure was right. "Adrian never gives up on emotion," he began. "He gives up when what he's pursuing is no longer logically worthwhile, when the cost outweighs the benefit." He paused. Now, in his mind, she's lost property. You don't give up on finding lost property. You give up on finding property that has changed hands. Lena turned to look at him. What did you say? If he believes she chose someone else, not by running away but by actively choosing, then in his eyes, she's no longer something he lost. She becomes something he was betrayed. Cassian turned to look at her for the first time in the conversation. Adrian Kwon can live with losing something. He can't live with being betrayed by someone he trusted. Silent. The lights from the Bampo Bridge continued to flicker on the water's surface. He wants me to pretend I'm with someone, not just anyone. Cassian's voice was flat. Me. Lena looked at him long enough that he didn't turn away. Do you understand what that means? To you? Have? He would see that as a betrayal from the person he trusted most. I know. And he won't just give up looking for me. He'll come looking for you too. Cassian didn't answer immediately. A small boat passed by in the middle of the river, its white light swaying with the waves. She watched it until it disappeared around the bend. Have you thought about that? She asked, her voice lower. Many times. And I'm still here talking to you. Lena looked down at the water. Something stirred within her chest. Not hope, not quite trust, but like when you're standing on solid ground and suddenly realize the ground beneath isn't concrete but wood. And while wood can still support weight, the feeling is completely different. I need time to think, she said. You have 48 hours. He withdrew his hand from his pocket. Then Park Soo-ho will submit his next report. This time, you can include your address. He walked away without looking back. Lena stood alone on the riverbank. Behind her, Seoul went on living its life. Millions of people neither knew nor cared that a woman stood there trying to decide whether to bet her life on a stranger or keep running alone until she was caught. She stood there until it was completely dark. Then she went back to the motel, lay down on the bed, stared at the ceiling, and couldn't sleep. The next morning, Lena messaged Zara via their signaling system. It wasn't about Cassian. She couldn't bring herself to include his name in any channel, even indirectly. She simply asked a question coded as a weather comment, which Zara understood to mean, "Can we trust the people in his family?" Zara replied 3 hours later. "In the middle of winter. It means dangerous, but not impossible." Lena read the answer 3 times. Then she stood up, put on her coat, and went out to find Cassian Rhee. She found him at a corner cafe in Yeonam-dong, a small cafe with windows overlooking a garden, the kind few people know about because it has no big sign and no public Wi-Fi. He sat alone with a cup of coffee and an old book, wearing a gray sweater, looking completely ordinary. She sat down opposite him without being invited. He lifted his head from the book. "I agree," she said bluntly. He closed the book. "Do you understand the conditions? We'll show up in front of his people. That'll be enough to convince them. No cheap act. Correct? And when he believes it, he'll target you." "I already said it. I know." Lena looked at him. "Why would you do this to me? Really?" Cassian picked up his coffee cup, gazing into it for a moment as if the answer lay there. "I've done a lot for Adrian Kwon over the past 12 years. Most of it I'm not proud of." He looked her straight in the eye. "This is something I can do without shame." She looked at him long enough to realize he was telling the truth. Then she ordered coffee. They started preparing 2 days in advance. Cassian chose the location, a restaurant in Gangnam, the kind of restaurant that Seoul's underworld elite frequented for its good food and, more importantly, because everyone knew that any information exchanged there would spread like wildfire. He booked the table under his own name. No need to hide it. That was the important point. Cassian Rhee booking a table in Gangnam was normal. Cassian Rhee booking a table for 2, and the second person being Lena Vale, was anything but normal. Lena bought new clothes, not the kind she usually wore, but the kind she would wear if she were living a different life with someone else. A dark dress, simple but not cheap. Heels. Enough to look like she was going to dinner with someone important, not enough to look like she was trying too hard. The night before the date, they met one last time at a cafe in Yeonam-dong to double-check every detail. "When we go in, you stay close to me," Cassian said, switching to an intimate form of address for the first time without asking. "Don't hold hands right away. People trust what they see gradually, more than what appears all at once." "I know how to act," Lena said. Don't act. If you act, they'll see. Adrian's people can tell the act from the way you breathe. He looked at her. You need to be there. Don't think about him. Don't think about the plan. Just be there. Easy to say.
I know. His voice didn't change, but there was a slight softness in it. But you lived 3 years with that man without revealing anything you were really thinking. You did it. Lena looked at him. There was something in that statement, not praise, not comfort, just a raw acknowledgement of what she had been through, and it touched her in a way she wasn't prepared for. She looked down at her coffee cup. Okay, she said. We'll do it your way.
The Gangnam restaurant the next morning was exactly as Cassian had predicted. Warm yellow light emanated from the low pendant lamps. Dark wood tables and chairs were spaced just enough for privacy, but not enough to prevent conversations from being overheard. Waiters in black suits moved as silently as shadows. And scattered throughout the dining room, Lena didn't need to look directly to recognize them, were about 3 faces she had seen at least once in the 3 years she had spent with Adrian. They didn't look directly at her and Cassian. That's the worst sign. A normal person would see it. The person watching wouldn't. Cassian pulled out a chair for her. It wasn't ostentatious, just something people do when they're used to it, when it becomes natural. She sat down. He sat opposite her. They looked at the menu for a few seconds before ordering, not talking much, but when they did speak, they looked into each other's eyes instead of glancing around the room. Don't check who's watching, Cassian whispered after the waiter left. That's what you're doing. I'm not. You glanced towards the table to your right twice in 90 seconds. Lena placed her hand on the table. She took a breath. I'm sorry. Don't apologize to me. Look at me. His voice was low and firm, but not angry. Just look at me. Take care of the rest yourself. She looked at him. And strangely enough, it wasn't as difficult as she thought. Not because she felt anything for Cassian at the time, but because for the past 3 years she had become accustomed to looking without truly seeing. Looking at Adrian and only seeing what he wanted her to see. Looking at Cassian now, who sat before her with his shoulders slightly slumped, carrying a weight she didn't quite understand, his gaze genuinely focused, without any hint of strategy. And she saw a man, not property, not a tool, a man. That was enough to keep her from looking away. They ate dinner for 2 hours. Cassian recounted his childhood, not to fill the silence, but because she asked, and he answered truthfully. He grew up in Busan, the son of a welder and an elementary school teacher with 4 siblings. He met Adrian at 18 in an alley in Itaewon in a situation neither of them would recount to a stranger. He saved you? Lena asked. Not exactly. Cassian looked at the glass of wine in front of him. He gave me a choice when I had no choice. But the choice he gave me was still his choice, not mine. But he stayed with him for 12 years. Yes. No further explanation, no clarification. She looked at him for a moment. I understand. And she understood it perfectly. In the way of someone who has experienced what it's like to stay with something that isn't good for you because there's nothing else to do. At the end of the meal, as they rose to leave, Cassian placed his hand on her back, gently, without squeezing. Just for the moment they stepped through the exit, a gesture noticeable enough to be seen, but not obvious enough to be contrived. Outside, Lena exhaled. It's done, she said. Not yet. Cassian stood beside her on the Gangnam sidewalk, looking straight ahead. It's just beginning. He's right. The news spread in less than 12 hours. Cassian Rhee and Lena Vale had dinner together in Gangnam. No coincidence. Not work-related. Hands on backs, eyes meeting. Lena knew this not because someone told her. She knew because Zara sent an emergency signal at 6 o'clock the next morning, the kind of signal only used when the situation changes suddenly. There is a storm. Lena saw those 2 words on the screen and felt her stomach tighten. She called Cassian using the number he'd given her, a disposable number, changed every 3 days. He answered the phone in one breath. I know. How did he react? A brief silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence someone is having while considering how much to say. He called me last night at 2 o'clock. And I didn't answer the phone. Cassian, you need to move today. Change your address. Not because he knows where you are, he doesn't yet, but because when he comes looking for me, he won't ask politely. Lena got out of bed. What about you? I can take care of myself. That's not the answer. Lena, his voice hardened in a way she'd learned to recognize as not coldness, but control. Move. Now. We'll talk later. The power line is switched off. She moved. This time, it wasn't Noan. She went further, to Dabongsan, an old residential area on the mountainside, the kind of place modern Seoul residents no longer pay much attention to, with narrow, steep streets and houses crammed together as if built by people who didn't believe in personal space. She rented a room from a 70-year-old woman who didn't care about names as long as there was enough cash and the tenant didn't make noise after 10 o'clock at night. The room was smaller than even the motel in Noan. A single bed, a small desk, a window overlooking the neighbor's rooftop, and further in the distance, the green expanse of Mount Dabongsan. In the morning, if the fog cleared early, she could see the mountain peak. For the first time since she ran away, she looked out the window and didn't see the tall building. She didn't know how to feel about it. 3 days later, Cassian came to see her in Dabongsan. He looked different. Not different in appearance. The same ordinary clothes, the same straight but not tense posture, but different in his eyes. Tired. Not the kind of tiredness from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much in his head for too long. She opened the door, and he stepped inside. He glanced around the room quickly, a habit of assessing the space that wouldn't go away, no matter how much he tried to, then sat down in the only chair available. He met with me, Cassian said. Lena closed the door. When? Yesterday. I had no choice but to answer the 17th call. He looked down at his hands. He wanted an explanation. What explanation did you give him? Cassian looked up. I'm not explaining anything. I'm letting him speak. What did he say? There was a moment of silence long enough for Lena to understand that what Adrian said wasn't so simple. Cassian stood up, walked to the small window, and looked out at the rooftops and the distant mountain range. He didn't ask where you were, Cassian began. That was the first thing I realized. He didn't ask. He just said, I know you're protecting her. I used to do that to you. Lena sat down on the edge of the bed. He's playing the loyalty card. I know. Cassian's voice remained unchanged. And I know he knows I know. That's not the point. What is the key point? He turned to look at her. The important point is he's gathering people, not to find you, or not just to find you. He's gathering people because he's about to do something and needs a full complement of forces before he does it. He paused. I don't know what, but he wouldn't gather people like that unless someone was about to get hurt. In the cramped room at Dabongsan, the atmosphere suddenly grew heavy. Zara, Lena said, her voice flat. Cassian didn't deny it. She's the only one left who can contact you. She doesn't know where I am. It doesn't matter. He'll use her not to get information, but to make you reveal yourself. Lena stood up. Her hands were clenched. I need to call her. No. Cassian quickened his pace toward her. That's what he's waiting for. Calling her, however you do, creates a connection, and he has people monitoring every connection she makes. I can't just sit here while... Zara knew the risks. Cassian's voice wasn't gentle, but it wasn't cold either. It was blunt. She knew from the beginning. Do you trust your friend? Lena looked at him. Her breathing quickened slightly. Her chest tightened in a way she couldn't control no matter how hard she tried. I believe her, she said. I don't believe the situation. Then don't trust the situation. Take control of it. How? Cassian was silent for a moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. By not waiting for him to come looking for us, we arrived before him. That night, they sat on the floor of Dabongsan's boarding house. The table wasn't big enough to spread out a map. And Cassian drew the entire network structure of Adrian's system using symbols on a piece of white paper. No detailed explanation was needed, just enough for Lena to see the overall shape. Adrian Kwon didn't run his empire directly. He ran it through people. 3 layers of intermediaries, each unaware of who was above them. The system was designed so that if one person was caught, the damage was contained. But precisely because of that, it also had a weakness. Information from top to bottom took time. And during that time, if someone on the upper level stepped out, "You're talking about yourself," Lena said. Cassian folded the paper. I've kept many things for 12 years. Not because he asked me to, because I'm the one he trusts the most. What? He looked at her for a moment. In the dim yellow light of the room, his face didn't resemble someone discussing strategy. It looked more like someone deciding how much they could trust someone. Accounting system, transportation routes, lists. He paused. Enough to shut down the whole thing in one night if you bring in the right people. Lena said nothing immediately. Outside the window, the night wind on the slopes of Dobongsan Mountain whistled through the small gap between the window frame and the wall. The sound was cold and drawn out, like someone's last breath before falling asleep. How long have you kept those things? 2 years? Why? Cassian looked at the folded piece of paper on the floor. Because I need something to make sure that if things ever fall apart, it won't be just one side that gets hurt. Lena understood it immediately. Not because it was complicated, but because she had lived long enough alongside powerful people to understand that this is what people do when they are in a situation with no clear way out. They keep evidence. They keep something to balance things out. Not necessarily to use, but to know that if needed, they have it. Who are you planning to give it to? I'm in contact with someone. He hesitated. It was the first time she'd seen him hesitate. A detective. Her name is Evelyn Hart. She's been investigating organized crime for 15 years. I don't know her well enough to trust her completely, but I know enough to know he hasn't bought her off yet. Not being able to buy it means... That means she's still a virgin, untouched by him. In Seoul, that's already rare. Lena looked down at the folded piece of paper. She thought of Zara somewhere in this city, still opening her cafe every morning, still answering customers as usual, carrying a risk she never signed up for but didn't refuse. Think about those 3 years living in that penthouse. The silent dinners, the mornings he left without a word, the times he looked at her in a way she'd mistaken for affection but was actually an inventory. He was checking to see if he had enough assets. He won't stop, she said. Not a question. Never. Even if I disappear completely, change my name, leave Seoul. He has people in 14 cities. Cassian's voice was blunt, not intending to scare her further, simply stating the truth. And now he's not just looking for you to get it back. He's looking for you because you're the only thing that reminds him someone witnessed him losing control. He can't live with that. Lena sat in silence for a long time. Then she looked up. When will you meet that detective? In 2 days. I want to be there. Cassian looked at her. Too dangerous. I want to be there, she repeated, her voice unwavering. This is my story. I'm not going to sit in a dark corner while someone else decides how it ends. Cassian looked at her long enough to realize that this wasn't a proposal, but a declaration. Okay, he said. The day before they met Evelyn Hart, Zara sent a signal. No comment on the weather this time. An image, a random photo posted on an anonymous account, seemingly a typical landscape picture, but with a detail only Lena noticed. The green coffee mug that Zara always kept on the checkout counter was upside down. Emergency code. Lena looked at the picture and felt her blood run cold. Being flipped upside down means they've arrived. She called Cassian in one breath. Zara is under control. A sigh came from the other end of the line. Not a sigh of surprise, but one from someone who had been waiting for this and still didn't want it to happen. Are you sure? The signal is clear. Is she injured? Don't know. A brief silence. Lena, listen to me. You can't go to her. I know. And you can't call her. I know. Her voice tightened. But he already has her. That means he'll use her as bait. He doesn't need information from her. He needs me to walk into it myself. That's right. So the plan is to meet the detective. We're moving it up. Tonight. Cassian's voice didn't change tone, but she sensed a tension in it, like a string stretched to its limit. I'll contact Hart right now. Cassian. What? Lena looked out the window, the neighbor's rooftops and the distant mountain range in the late afternoon shadows. If it doesn't work out tonight, what will you do? The silence lasted longer this time. I won't let him get you back, he finally said. Lena heard in those words not a bold promise, but simply reality. The stark reality of someone who had made a decision long ago, but had never spoken it aloud until now. And that, for some reason, scared her more than anything Adrian Kwon had ever said. She wasn't afraid of Cassian. She was afraid of herself. She was afraid that part of her was starting to believe this. They met Evelyn Hart at 9 o'clock in the evening in an underground parking lot in Mapo, a location Hart chose, the kind where security cameras are often obscured by concrete pillars and flickering fluorescent lights. Hart was a woman in her 40s with short hair, no makeup, and wearing a thick navy coat. She looked at Lena first, then at Cassian. "So she's here too," Hart said. Not a question, not a complaint, just an acknowledgement of fact. "She wants to hear it in person," Cassian said. "Okay." Hart turned to look at Lena. "I've known about you for 3 years, since you started appearing alongside Kwon." Her voice was blunt and left no time for polite formalities. "You're not my target, Kwon is. But to properly shut him down, I need something that won't be overturned by the court within 6 months." "I have that," Cassian said. Hart looked at him. "You know that if you give it to me, there's no turning back." "I know. Kwon will know it's you." "I know. And she will remain in danger until we have enough people to actually catch him. Not a day. Maybe weeks." "How long do you need it for?" Lena asked. Hart looked at her, assessing. "If the documents are strong enough, 4 weeks to get through the legal department without a leak. But in those 4 weeks, within those 4 weeks, he'll know Cassian is the one who did this," Lena said. "And he'll come looking for Cassian before she can do anything." Hart did not deny it. In the Mapo underground parking garage, the fluorescent lights overhead flickered once and then settled. The smell of car oil and concrete filled the air. In the distance, the sounds of the city echoed down like something too loud to be stopped. Cassian pulled a small USB drive from his jacket. "Place it in Hart's hands." Hart looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Cassian. "Are you sure?" "From 2 years ago." Hart nodded. He picked up the USB drive. "I'll contact you through this channel." She handed him a small piece of paper. "No phone calls, no text messages, only this channel." "What about Zara Quinn?" Lena asked. Hart looked at her. A pause. "We know she's under surveillance. We can't intervene immediately without revealing the investigation's path." Her voice was neither apologetic nor cold. "Is she injured?" "Don't know. If she's not injured, Kwon is holding her hostage, waiting for a reaction. That reaction is you." Hart looked straight into Lena's eyes. "Do you understand? You mustn't react." Lena looked back, understood. But in her chest, beneath the calm she had learned to maintain over the past 3 years, beneath the determination she had rebuilt piece by piece since that rainy night in Seoul, something was rubbing against her and tearing apart. Zara is sleeping somewhere tonight under the watchful eyes of Adrian Kwon's men, and Lena is standing in the underground parking lot listening to someone tell her not to react. Don't react. She was used to that phrase. 3 years living alongside Adrian Kwon were 3 years of learning not to react, learning to swallow, learning to move on, learning to turn your face into a mask and your heart into something without nerves. And look at the final result. She stood up straight. She looked at Hart. 4 weeks. 4 weeks. If anyone gets injured within 4 weeks, Lena, Cassian's voice came from beside her. She didn't look at him. If anyone gets hurt, she continued, her voice so flat it sounded like she was reading from a script, I won't sit here waiting any longer, whatever your plan is. Hart looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. 4 weeks, she repeated. Then she walked away, her shoes clicking on the concrete, the USB drive disappearing into her coat pocket. Her figure gradually diminished towards the parking lot exit. Lena and Cassian were left alone. He looked at her. Are you okay? She didn't answer immediately. She looked where Hart had been standing, nothing but concrete and flickering fluorescent lights. No, she said, being honest for the first time in a very long time. I'm not okay. Her voice wasn't shaky, but there was something in it that she wasn't trying to hide. But I'll do what needs to be done. Cassian was silent. No comfort. No saying, everything will be all right. Just standing there in the underground parking lot beneath Seoul, beside her, in the darkness and the smell of car oil, and the sounds of the city echoing down from above. That was enough for her to know he wasn't going anywhere. And that's the worst thing that could happen, because Lena Vale had learned very well how to not need someone who wasn't going anywhere, and now she was having to relearn how to forget that lesson while the world around her was burning, But before she could think any further, Cassian's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His face changed. Not fear, not surprise. Just the way people look when they receive news they knew was coming, but are still not fully prepared for.
"What is it?" Lena asked.
Cassian looked up at her. And in his eyes then, she saw something that made her stomach clench in a way that had nothing to do with fear or grief, but the stark realization that from this moment on there would be no turning back, whether they wanted to or not. "He knows you're in Dobongsan," Cassian said. "He knows you're in Dobongsan." That sentence took exactly 1 second to travel from Lena's ear down to the place in her chest where she held all the things she wouldn't allow herself to feel. 1 second. Then she started to move. "Where's your car?" Her voice was so flat it sounded like someone else's. "Floor B2, East Entrance." Cassian had already walked ahead of her, his phone tucked into his pocket, his left hand subtly pulling down his jacket sleeve as if checking to see if anything was still there. "Don't run. Walk normally." "Who sent you the message?" "The person I trust." "How much do you believe it?" Cassian didn't answer immediately. They walked past 2 rows of cars, their shoes tapping rhythmically on the concrete, the fluorescent lights above flickering like something slowly dying. At the end of the row, a gray sedan was parked against the wall. "That's enough to know this isn't false information." He opened the car door remotely. "Get in." Lena got in. The door closed. The smell of leather seats and the cold air filled the enclosed space. Cassian got into the driver's seat, started the engine, didn't turn on the interior lights, didn't look back, only a brief glance in the rearview mirror, then drove out of the parking lot via the westbound side exit. "That room," Lena began. "Don't come back." "I know, but I need to know how he knows." Cassian drove onto the main road, merging into Seoul's nighttime traffic, his gray sedan indistinguishable from thousands of others. His wrist tightened slightly on the steering wheel before releasing. "The landlady," he said. Lena looked straight ahead. "The old woman is 70 years old. His men paid for that room 2 months ago. Everyone who rented it was notified." Cassian's voice was flat. No anger, no apology, just a fact laid flat like a stone. "He didn't find you by tracking. He found you by setting a trap." Lena sat still for long enough for the car to pass 3 intersections. "How many such places are there?" "I don't know the total number, but it's enough to cover the suburbs and semi-suburban areas of Seoul. That means during the entire time I thought I was hiding. That means you're luckier than you think. This time." Cassian stopped at a red light. He looked straight ahead. "His men haven't reported yet because they're waiting for confirmation. That's why we have time now." "How much time?" "Not much." The light turned green. The car continued on its way. Lena watched Seoul drift by outside the window, familiar and unfamiliar streets, signs glowing in the night, pedestrians on the sidewalks who neither knew nor cared that inside this gray car, 2 people were running away from something bigger than anything she had ever imagined when she stood in the kitchen of her apartment and thought that leaving was the hardest part. Letting go was never the hardest part. The hardest part is everything that happens afterward. Cassian took her to an apartment in Mapo, not where he usually lived, obviously, since the apartment was almost completely empty except for a table, 2 chairs, and a small refrigerator. The walls were plain white. The wooden floors were old. There were no curtains, only dark sheets taped directly to the glass. "How many spaces like this do you have?" Lena asked as she walked in. "Enough for my needs." "That's a bad answer. 3 places." He locked the door. "No one knows about this place. Not even him." Lena stood in the middle of the room, looking around. The only light came from a single ceiling light bulb, casting a weak, yellowish glow. Aside from the tarpaulin covering the window, there was no way to tell whether it was day or night. She sat down on the chair, her hands rested on her lap. She looked down at her hands. "Cassian." "What?" "Who knows if he's been in contact with Hart?" He stopped in the middle of the room, his back still turned to her. "No one." "Are you sure?" A pause shorter than necessary. "Certainly." Lena looked at his back. "Turn around and look at me." He turned around. His face was normal, or deliberately normal. If no one else knew, then where did the information about Dobongsan come from? I went there without leaving a trace. You're the only one who knows I was there." Cassian didn't say anything right away. In the stark white room at Mapo, that silence weighed more heavily than anything that had been said before. "What are you asking, Lena?" "I'm asking something I don't want to ask." Her voice didn't tremble. It wasn't high. It was flat, the kind only a person would hear when they're straining to keep themselves from breaking. "Who in your network told him?" Cassian looked at her. His eyes didn't deny the question. "I don't know," he said. "That's the second worst answer tonight." "I know." He walked over and sat down in the chair opposite. The only distance between them was a small table. "I told 3 people about Dobongsan as part of a contingency plan. If I couldn't get in touch within 48 hours, they'd know where to find you. Just 3 people. And one of those 3, I don't know who." For the first time, his voice held something she recognized as genuine anger, not directed at her, but at himself. "I thought I knew who to trust. 12 years I stood beside that man and learned to read people. I thought I was good enough to know. You're not good enough." "No." No excuses, no further explanation. Lena looked at him. In Cassian Rhee's eyes at that moment was not what she expected. Not guilt, not a pathetic apology. Just the raw realization of someone who had made a mistake and was sitting with it instead of running away from it. She didn't know if that made her feel worse or better. "What should we do now?" she asked. "I need to find out who it is." "How?" "By giving those 3 people 3 different pieces of information and seeing which one reaches him first." Cassian looked straight into her eyes. "It takes time. And in the meantime, you can't be with me." "I can't be alone. Not alone." He stood up, walked to the refrigerator, and pulled out a piece of paper taped to the inside of the door. A thin piece of paper with handwritten blue ink. "There's someone. She has no contact with him, no contact with me. But she'll keep you safe for 3 days." Lena looked at the paper. "Whose?" "Her name is Ji Yeon. She runs a laundromat in Seoul." Cassian placed the paper on the table. "You used to work at a laundromat. You know the job. She won't ask any questions if you do a good job." Lena looked at the paper, then at him. 3 days. 3 days. I'll get in touch via—" "Not through any channel," she interrupted. "You just said one of 3 people you trust reported you. That means any channel you're using could be monitored." Cassian remained silent. "You either show up or you don't," she said. 3 days. If you don't show up after 3 days, I'll take matters into my own hands." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I won't sit here waiting any longer." Cassian looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Ji-yeon's laundry shop in Seoul sits between a pharmacy and a small noodle shop, its narrow storefront housing 3 old industrial washing machines and a cold white light inside. Ji-yeon is a woman in her 50s with short, salt and pepper hair, thick, rough fingers from years of manual labor, and eyes that observe people with the kind of gaze one gets from seeing all sorts of people pass by her shop, no longer surprised by anyone. Lena arrived at 7 o'clock the next morning. She didn't explain much. She just said she needed a job and a place to stay. Ji-yeon looked her up and down, looked into her eyes, then turned back to the running washing machine. "Do you know how to sort fabrics?" "No." "This machine has a broken spin button. You have to press and hold it for 3 seconds before changing programs." "Okay?" "You sleep in the back storage room. No visitors, no phones on silent after 10 o'clock. Understand?" Ji-yeon didn't ask for the person's real name. She didn't ask why. Perhaps she was old enough to know that sometimes people show up at her shop with the face of someone running away from something, and the only question that matters isn't what they're running away from, but whether they're doing good work. Lena does a good job. She sorts fabrics, operates machines, folds clothes correctly, and delivers goods to customers. Her hands work while her mind is elsewhere, in the stark white room in Mapo, where Cassian is trying to figure out who betrayed him, somewhere in Seoul, where Zara is under surveillance, on the small USB drive in Evelyn Hart's hand being transferred through countless layers of legal procedures. The first day has passed. Monday. Cassian did not appear. On Tuesday morning, Lena was folding a pile of bed sheets when Ji-yeon walked into the back storage room and placed a phone on the wooden shelf next to her. "It's yours. Someone left it outside the door early this morning." Lena looked at the phone. The screen was off. A simple, prepaid phone, the kind people buy at convenience stores with cash. Ji-yeon walked out without saying anything more. Lena picked up her phone. She turned on the screen. A single message, no sender name, just an unknown number. Meet me at the place where we first met. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Come alone. She read the message twice. Then she realized something was wrong. The place where they first met was an underground jazz club in Hapjeong. Cassian knew that. But Cassian also knew that she would instantly realize anyone else could know it too if the traitor in his network had heard enough. Coming alone is not how Cassian wrote it. He would never ask her to come alone. Not in this situation. Lena stood motionless in the back storage of the Seoul laundry shop, the industrial washing machines rumbling outside, the smell of detergent and heat enveloping her, and she realized she was looking into a trap encapsulated in 42 characters. She put the phone down on the shelf. Think, if this is a trap, who said it? The traitor in Cassian's network knowing where they first met means that person knows enough about their history. It means that person is closer to Cassian than she thinks. And if this is a trap, then where is Cassian? She picked up her phone and called back the number that had just texted her. No signal. The number is off. She arrived in Hapjeong at 1:45. Not because she believed it wasn't a trap, but because if it was, she needed to know who was setting it and what they knew. And if it wasn't a trap, if it really was Cassian and something had happened that prevented him from communicating in any other way, then she needed to know that even more. She arrived earlier than the scheduled time to observe, sitting at a tea shop across the alley leading down to the underground jazz club, ordering a hot cup of tea, looking out the window. No one was acting strangely. No cars were parked in awkward positions for too long. No one was standing awkwardly on the sidewalk for too long. No familiar faces were visible. At exactly 1:58, Cassian appeared at the end of the alley. Lena saw him through the glass and immediately knew something had happened. Not because he was obviously injured, he walked normally, not limping, but because of the way he walked. His shoulders were lower than usual, his head was slightly bowed, like someone carrying something too heavy and no longer trying to appear light. She left the money on the table and went outside. They met in the middle of the alley. "You've arrived," he said. "You look terrible." "I know." He glanced around the alley once, then he looked at her. "We need to go inside." Oh, the underground jazz club was deserted during the day, only the cleaner and the old owner rearranging the tables and chairs. Cassian chose the darkest corner furthest from the door, sat down, and placed his hands on the table as if he needed to see them to make sure they were still there. Lena sat opposite him, gazing at his face in the dim light. "There's a bruise under my left jaw. Not big, but noticeable." "Who hit you?" Cassian looked down at his hands. "I found the traitor." "What?" "Min-jun." He said the name as if reading from a list. There was no particular emotion in his voice, or so much that it was barely audible. "I've known him for 9 years. He's worked for me directly for 5 years now." Lena remained silent. "He didn't sell the information for money," Cassian continued. "Or not just for money. Adrian has something on him. I don't know exactly what, he won't say, but he's been reporting on you since the first week he knew I was helping you." He looked up. "Not just Dobong-san. Everything. The motel in Nowon, the bookstore in Insadong, the Han River Bank." Lena listened to each of those places and felt the opposite of what she expected. Not panic, but something cold and clear spreading in her chest, like when one tries to look into fog and suddenly the fog dissipates. Everything. From the beginning. From the beginning. That means he knows everything we've done. Have. That means dinner in Gangnam. He knew before his men reported it. He knew because Min-jun told him I was preparing that plan. Lena looked Cassian straight in the eyes. That means that dinner didn't convince him we were actually together. Cassian said nothing. He knew it was staged. Have. And he did nothing. Nothing has been done yet. The silence between those two words, no and not yet, lingered. Lena sat with it for a few seconds, feeling its form in the air. "He's waiting for something," she said. "Right." Cassian looked down at the table. "I think he knows about Heart. I think he knows about USB." Lena felt her blood run even colder. "Min-jun knows about Heart?" "Not directly, But he knows I'm in contact with someone outside the network. Enough for him to deduce it, or enough for him to report it and let Adrian deduce it. So, USB... I don't know if it's still intact. Cassian's voice cracked slightly for the first time. Not much, just a small crack audible. If Adrian has gotten to Hart, she can't be bought, Lena said, repeating his own words. I used to think that way. Lena looked at him. What are you thinking now? Cassian looked up. In his eyes, there was not uncertainty, but something worse. It was certainty about something he didn't want to be certain of. I think Hart might still be intact, but her line of investigation isn't. He took a breath. Minjun knows I passed documents to someone in the investigative agency. If Adrian is smart enough, and he is smart enough, he won't attack Hart directly. He'll find someone above Hart. Find someone who can bring the line of investigation to a halt from within. Lena sat there with that in mind. 4 weeks. Hart said it took 4 weeks to get the documents through the legal department without a leak. But if Adrian knew the investigation line existed before the USB was transferred, then 4 weeks might have been too late before it even began. We need to contact Hart right now, she said. I tried. The communication channel she gave me hasn't been working since this morning. Silent. In the deserted underground jazz club, a cleaner drags a heavy chair across the floor, the scraping sound a prolonged, unpleasant pause. Outside, Seoul continues to live. Cassian? Lena said his name slowly, as if to make sure he heard each syllable clearly. I need you to tell me the truth just once. I always tell the truth? Not always. She looked him straight in the eye. What does that USB drive actually contain? Not a summary. Everything. He looked back at her. The moment was long enough for her to know he was considering how much to say. The accounting system, the shipping routes, the list of bought officials. He paused. And something else. What? Evidence of a disappearance. 4 years ago. A woman. His voice lowered. She was a witness in a case related to his activities. She disappeared 3 days before her scheduled court appearance. Lena couldn't breathe for a second. I have proof that he did it. I have enough evidence that the court cannot ignore. And he kept it for 2 years. I keep it as insurance. Cassian's voice wasn't apologetic, but it contained something she recognized as burdensome. The kind of burden one carries for someone who's held on to something for too long and knows exactly what that means to them. I know what that sounds like. It sounds exactly what it is, she said. No malice. Just the truth. Cassian nodded. He didn't argue. If Adrian knew that evidence existed on that USB, Lena continued, her voice turning sharper and colder, it wouldn't be about him wanting me back anymore. It would be about him wanting to destroy the evidence before it reached the rightful owner. Correct. And destroy anyone who knows of its existence. Cassian said nothing. There was no need to say anything. Lena looked at him, at the bruise under his left jaw, at his hands on the table, not trembling but clenched tightly in the way someone is restraining themselves. Does he know I know about USB? Minjun doesn't know I told you that detail, Cassian paused. But if he deduced it from the whole situation, he'll assume I know. She rose from her chair. He'll assume I know everything. Cassian looked up. Lena. Hart. She looked down at him. We need to go to her in person. No through any channel. No texting. In person. I don't know where she is. I know where she works. Going straight to the investigative agency it's the only thing left. Her voice wasn't loud, but there was no room for argument in it. We have nothing left to lose that way, Cassian. We lost it the moment Min Jun started reporting. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up. Okay. They emerged from the underground jazz club into the bright daylight of Hapjeong, and Lena, for the first time in weeks, saw Seoul in full light without feeling the need to retreat into the shadows. Not because the situation is better. The situation is worse than ever. But it's because she stopped trying to control something that was too big to control and started just looking at it directly. They walked toward the car, shoulder to shoulder, not holding hands, not speaking. Passers-by didn't glance at them any longer than necessary. 2 adults walking on a Seoul sidewalk in the morning, nothing particularly remarkable about their appearance. Then Cassian's phone rang. This time it wasn't a text message, a call, an unknown number. He glanced at the screen for a second. Then he picked up the phone and put it on speakerphone without asking Lena's permission. Adrian Kwon's voice echoed in the morning air of Hapjeong, clear and relaxed, like someone calling to check in with an old friend. "I think it's time we had a serious talk, Cassian." Cassian said nothing. "Continue walking. You don't have to answer. I just want you to know one thing." Adrian's voice paused for a single beat, a calculated pause, the kind someone who had learned to use silence as a weapon. "Your girl, her friend, Zara Quinn, is sitting having her morning coffee in a very pleasant place right now. She's fine, completely fine." Lena looked at the phone in Cassian's hand. Her jaw tightened. "I just wanted to make sure you know that I can change that anytime I want." Adrian's voice remained calm, relaxed, the same voice of someone sipping whiskey and discussing the weather. "Ms. Vale understands what I'm saying. She knows I'm not making empty threats." She knows. 3 years living alongside that person taught her that very clearly. Adrian Kwon wasn't making empty threats. He was making an announcement. "Downstairs. 10 minutes." His voice changed slightly, no longer relaxed, no longer friendly, but still not high. Still cold. "The hotel lobby on Yanghwa Street. Miss Vale is coming alone. No need to bring anything." A pause. "Otherwise, Zara Quinn won't be able to have her morning coffee anymore. The power line is switched off. The sounds of Seoul return. Traffic, wind, the footsteps of passers-by." Cassian and Lena stood motionless on the sidewalk in Hapjeong. He held his phone in his hand, the screen off. Beside him, Lena remained silent. No need to say anything. They both knew exactly what had just happened. Everything. The entire plan, the USB, Heart, the investigation channel, weeks of hiding and calculating and trusting the wrong people, all collapsed in a 30-second phone call. Adrian Kwon doesn't need to look for Lena Vale. He just needed to wait for her to walk in on her own. And now he has Zara. Lena looked down at the pavement for a moment. Gray asphalt, a small piece of paper someone had dropped being blown by the wind toward the drain. She watched it move and thought about the first 48 hours of her escape, when she still believed that geography was the only thing that mattered. That if she was far enough away, hard to find, invisible enough, she could get away. She thought about Zara sitting in her coffee shop every morning because a friend had asked her to stay and pretend everything was normal. She thought of the japchae bag lying on the marble floor outside the penthouse door, the only thing she had left behind. Then she turned to look at Cassian. "Don't follow me," she said. "Lena, listen to me." Her voice didn't tremble, not at all. "If you come in there with me, he'll kill you right there. You know that. And if you go alone, then I won't be killed on the spot." She looked at him. "I'm valuable to him while I'm alive. You're not, ever since Minjun reported it." Cassian looked at her. His jaw tightened in the way she had learned to recognize when he was gripping something very tightly. "I can't let you. You won't let me do anything." She stepped closer to him, close enough so no one passing by could hear. "Listen to me. Heart, is she satisfied? Even though the investigation channel is compromised, does she still have that USB?" Cassian was silent for a second. "I think so. You need to be sure. Right now. Find a way to contact her directly, not through any of the channels you've used before. Go to her office if necessary. Prove yourself. Do whatever it takes to ensure those documents remain secure." She looked him straight in the eye. "That's the only thing that matters right now." "And you?" Lena took a step back. She looked at him one last time with a gaze in which she made no attempt to conceal anything, no hope, no fear, no emotion she had yet to name, just the clear and direct sight of two people standing before what might be the last time they would see each other. "I went to see him." "Lena." "Find Heart, Cassian." She turned. "Don't let me go in there only for everything to be in vain." She walked along the Hapjeong sidewalk towards Yanghwa Street in Seoul without stopping for anything, and behind her Cassian Rhee stood alone with her phone in hand and in the space where a woman had just walked out. 10 minutes. She had 10 minutes and a long street ahead of her, and no plan other than to walk into the lobby of the hotel on Yanghwa Street and look straight into the eyes of the man she hadn't really seen in 3 years. And this time, unlike all the previous times, she had nothing more to lose. Yanqua Street was longer than Lena remembered, or perhaps she was walking slower than she thought. Her steps were steady, but in her mind everything was racing at a different pace, faster, more frantic, fragments of thought colliding like shards of broken glass before they hit the floor. 10 minutes. She counted her steps. Zara was sitting having her morning coffee in a very pleasant place. That's what Adrian said. Not Zara is being held captive, not Zara is being threatened, but rather a very pleasant place. This is the kind of language someone uses to let you know they're in complete control, that they don't need to be aggressive to be dangerous, that their politeness is precisely what's most terrifying. She knows that. After 3 years of studying with one person, she should know that. The hotel on Yanghua Street was an unremarkable 4-star establishment, not a penthouse, not a place where Seoul's elite could show off. It was the kind of place people choose because it wouldn't be remembered. The lobby had high ceilings, warm yellow lighting, brown leather chairs, and a reception desk with 2 young staff members in black suits staring at computer screens with practiced professionalism. Lena stepped through the automatic glass door. The cool air from the air conditioner touched her face like someone's hand. Adrian Kwon sat alone in the right-hand section of the lobby, wearing a dark navy suit without a tie, a coffee cup resting on his lap. He looked like a businessman waiting for a morning meeting. He looked like someone with no reason to rush. No security guard saw it. That was the first thing she checked, and it didn't ease her anxiety. It made it worse. His men were here. She just didn't see them. She walked over. She sat down in the chair opposite him without being invited, and he did not stand up. They looked at each other. For the first time in over 2 months. Adrian looked like he hadn't had enough sleep. Not because he looked bad. Adrian Kwon never looks bad. But because there was something unusually sharp in his eyes. The kind of sharpness of someone who has honed themselves for too long on a single thing. "Lena," he said. His voice was normal, the voice of someone meeting an acquaintance. "Where is Zara?" He picked up his coffee cup, took a small sip, and set it down. Each movement was unhurried. "She's fine. I didn't ask her if she was okay. I asked her where she was. When we're done, I'll let her go." He looked at Lena. "It's as simple as that." "There's nothing simple about this story." Adrian's lips curved slightly. Not a smile, just an acknowledgement. "You're still so straightforward. I've always liked that about you." "Don't." Her voice was flat. "Don't do that." He looked at her for a moment, then he set his coffee cup down on the table beside him, leaned back in his chair, and crossed his arms in the way Lena had seen him hundreds of times. The way someone is transitioning from politeness to seriousness. "Cassian passed the documents to someone in the investigative agency," he said. Not a question. "I don't know what he does." "Don't." He mimicked the exact word she'd used, his voice not angry but sharp. "We're past that stage, Lena. You know. I know you know." A brief silence. "Okay." She looked him straight in the eye. "So what do you want?" "I want to know exactly what that document contains." "Ask Cassian." "Cassian won't tell me." His voice remained unchanged. "But you will. Why should I tell you?" Adrian tilted his head slightly to one side. "Because Zara Quinn was sitting in a room not far from here with my 2 men, and she didn't know she was in that situation." Lena sat there with that sentence in her mind. He said, "I didn't know I was in that situation." She repeated each word slowly. Meaning, she thought she was okay. "That's right. And he wants me to decide whether she continues to think that way or not." "That's right." Adrian looked at her. There was no particular malice in his eyes. That was the most disgusting thing about him, that he could say things like this with the face of someone discussing a business deal. Lena inhaled, exhaled. "That document contains what you think it contains," she said. "I don't know the specific details." "You know enough. I know enough to tell you that if Cassian gave it to the right person, you have no way of stopping yourself from sitting here talking to me." Something changed in Adrian's eyes. It was subtle. Subtle enough that someone not looking closely would miss it. Lena didn't miss it. "That's the right person," he said. "Are you sure that's the right person?" She looked at him. "What do you mean?" Adrian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice dropping a notch. "I mean, Evelyn Hart received that document 4 days ago. And this morning, her investigation office was suspended by an order from above because of a parallel investigation into internal misconduct. He looked directly into Lena's eyes. That document is currently in the evidence system of a frozen investigation. No one can access it until the suspension order is lifted. And that order, he paused for a moment, it won't be lifted anytime soon. Lena didn't let her expression change. Inside, below the composure that 3 years alongside this man had taught her to maintain, something cold and heavy was spreading through her chest. Cassian's worst fear had come true. Adrian didn't attack Hart directly. Instead, he found someone on the floor above Hart to freeze the entire line of investigation from the inside. Hart said, 4 weeks. 4 weeks to get the documents through the legal department without a leak. They don't have 4 weeks. They don't have 4 days. Then what are you doing sitting here? Lena's voice was calm, the kind of voice that says, if you've got the situation under control, I haven't gained control of one thing. Adrian looked at her. For the first time in this meeting, there was something in his eyes she hadn't quite expected. Not anger, not strategy. Something that looked close to, no, it couldn't be. I haven't gained control of Cassian. Cassian? Cassian Rhee still knows what he knows. Even with the documents frozen, he can still testify. He can still talk to journalists, to independent lawyers, to anyone persistent enough to listen. Adrian's voice was low and firm, like concrete. And he will do it as long as he has a reason to. Silent. In the hotel lobby, a tourist couple was dragging their suitcases across the hall, the sound of the wheels rolling on the stone floor echoing and fading away. The receptionist nodded in greeting. Something both very ordinary and very strange was happening simultaneously with this. He wants me to tell Cassian to stop, Lena said. I want you back. Adrian looked at her. The words that came out of his mouth carried nothing she expected, not a command, not a threat, more blunt than both. You back, Cassian, stop. I'll release Zara Quinn, and everything will go back to how it was. As before, she repeated. As before. Lena gazed at him for a long moment, at the man with whom she had spent 3 years of her life, the man to whom she had brought japchae at 11 o'clock at night, the man whose mood she had learned to read by the way he pulled up his sleeve, the man to whom she had stood outside the door and heard her voice erased by a calm remark. Never, she said. Something cracked in Adrian's eyes. Not much, but Lena saw it. A small fissure in the layer of control he had also honed over the years. Then he stood up. Okay, he said, his voice returning to its flat, icy tone. Then let's do it another way. Room 412. They rode the elevator in silence. Lena, Adrian, and 2 men in plain clothes whom she hadn't seen in the lobby, but who appeared from 2 different directions when Adrian stood up. The kind of person trained to be invisible until they no longer needed to be. She didn't resist, not out of fear, or perhaps not just fear, but because resisting in the hotel elevator would only lead to her being dragged away instead of walking on her own. And she needs her hands free. Room 412 wasn't a fancy room. It had a double bed, a small desk, and a window overlooking a section of the adjacent building's wall. Grayish daylight filtered through the thin curtains. Zara sat on a chair next to the table. Lena saw her friend, and for a fraction of a second, all the composure she had maintained all morning crumbled. Zara looked fine. No obvious injuries, not tied up, sitting upright with a cup of coffee on the table in front of her. But her eyes when she saw Lena walk in Zara's eyes, there was something Lena recognized as the carefully controlled fear of someone who had been sitting there long enough to understand the situation she was in. Lena, Zara began. She's fine, Adrian said from behind Lena, his voice eerily calm. We're just talking. Lena didn't look back at him. She looked at Zara, making eye contact in the way only 2 close friends of many years could. Say nothing. I'm handling this, trust me. Zara nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. Understood. Sit down. Adrian pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down comfortably, as if he were returning home. The 2 men stood in opposite corners of the room, their hands hanging loosely, their faces expressionless. We have time. What do you want? Lena stood instead of sitting, not to project an air of strength, simply because she couldn't sit down at this moment without him seeing her clenched fists. I want you to call Cassian Rhee right in front of me, Adrian said. Ask him to meet you here. Say whatever you need to say to convince him you're in trouble and need him. He'll come. And when he arrived, let's talk. 4 people in the room. Adrian's voice was calm. I want to hear him explain firsthand what he did and why. Lena looked at him. I want to talk. Have. With Cassian, in a hotel room, after taking Zara hostage. Don't use that word. For the first time, a hint of coldness crept into Adrian's voice. She's drinking coffee. She can't go out. Nobody stopped her from going out. Zara didn't try to stand up to prove or deny it. She sat still, and Lena understood that it wasn't that Zara was physically unable to stand up, but rather that she was smart enough to know that standing up would turn a manageable situation into an impossible one. Call Cassian, Adrian repeated. There was an infinite patience in his voice, the kind Lena knew he could maintain all day. That's all I asked. And then? Then it depends on what he says. Lena stood in room 412 of a 4-star hotel on Yanghwa Street in Seoul, looking at the man she had spent 3 years with, and realized she was facing a choice not between good or bad, but between 2 things with different consequences, neither of which she could fully foresee. If she called Cassian and he came over, Adrian would have both of them in one room. And even though he said, let's talk, Lena knew enough about Adrian Kwon to know that talking was never just talking when he was sitting there with absolute power in his hands. If she doesn't call, then Zara. She looked at Zara. Zara looked back at her. And in her friend Lena's eyes at that moment, she read something she didn't want to read but couldn't help but read. Don't call him. It wasn't that Zara wasn't afraid. It was that Zara understood, as well as Lena did, what Cassian's entry into this room meant. No, Lena said. The room fell silent for a moment. Adrian looked at her. No? I didn't call him. Her voice was flat. Her heart was beating faster than usual, but her voice didn't betray it. Whatever you do. Something changed in the air in the room. One of the 2 men in the corner of the room moved, just one small step, but enough for Lena to see. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and gazed out at the gray wall. You think I can't do it? He said, his back turned to her. I think you're smart enough to know that if you do anything to her in a hotel with cameras and staff and hundreds of witnesses, Cassian's documents become the only thing the court needs to convict you of everything. He didn't come back. You've been stuck ever since Cassian passed that USB, Lena continued. Her voice was still flat, but there was a sharper edge to it. Not because the document could destroy you, but because you knew its existence meant you'd lost the control you thought you had. You didn't come here to solve the problem. You came here because you didn't know what else to do. Adrian turned around, and Lena saw in his eyes, for the first time in 3 years, something she had never seen before. No anger, no calculations. Something that really looks like, damage. She didn't know what to do about it. You think I have no feelings, he said. His voice, for the first time, wasn't entirely flat. I don't think your feelings are related to me. You're wrong. Adrian, you're wrong. He stepped closer, not aggressively, but the polite distance was gone. I wasn't looking for you just because you know about the documents. I was looking for you because— Don't, Lena interrupted. Her voice was no longer flat. Something broke in it. Not tears, not a tremor, but something sharp and weary, and more real than anything she had said in 3 years. Don't do that. Don't stand there and tell me that now. After everything you've said, after everything I've heard, don't. He remained silent. I was standing outside your penthouse door, she said. He didn't know I was there. That's why you're telling the truth. Her voice didn't tremble. You said I was easy to manipulate. You said I knew my place. You said people work better when they believe in something. She looked him straight in the eye. I am that something. 3 years. I'm a tool you don't need to replace because it's still working perfectly. The room was so quiet, she could hear the hum of the air conditioner running inside the walls. Adrian looked at her, and for the first time in this encounter, she couldn't read him completely. Then the phone of one of the 2 men in the corner of the room rang. The person looked at the screen, looked up, looked at Adrian. The ground floor, the person said. Adrian didn't turn away from Lena immediately. He looked at her for another second, a look she couldn't quite name, then turned to the other man. How much? I don't know. At least 6. In room 412, the atmosphere changed abruptly in a way that Lena, with enough experience, recognized. Something had just happened outside, and it was pulling things in a direction no one in the room could fully control anymore. Adrian looked at her again. This time his gaze was completely different. No longer polite, no longer calculating, just the cold, hard essence of someone shifting into survival mode. Who? He asked her directly to her face. Lena didn't answer. Who did you contact? I haven't been in contact with anyone. She looked straight back. I came here alone, as you requested. Cassian Rhee didn't come because Lena called. He came because he had been standing on the sidewalk in Hapjeong watching her walk away and decided in less than 30 seconds that he couldn't let her go in there alone, no matter what she said. But he didn't come empty-handed. In the time between Lena's departure and his decision, he made a phone call. Not to Hart. Hart's channel was still dead. He called someone he hadn't been in contact with for 2 years. Someone he knew Adrian Kwon hadn't touched, not because she was invisible, but because she had been patient and wise enough to wait for the right moment. Detective Evelyn Hart answered the phone on the second ring. I need you to come to Yanghua Street right now, Cassian said. Not through official channels. In person. Bring someone you trust. Suspension order? It's not because of the suspension order. Because the woman in that USB disappeared 4 years ago. And the person who did it was just sitting in room 412 of the Yanghua Hotel with the only surviving witness. A pause at the beginning of the string. How long? 15 minutes. I'm here. Lena didn't know that when she stood in room 412 and heard Adrian's men say, ground floor, at least 6 people. She just knew something had changed. And in that moment of change, as Adrian turned to the man receiving the news and the distance between her and Zara was only 3 steps, she did the only thing that mattered. She stood up straight and walked over to Zara. Don't run. Don't scream. Just stand beside your friend and look at Adrian in the way of someone who has made up their mind and doesn't need to reconsider. Adrian looked at her. He looked at Zara. He looked back at her. Then the man's phone in the corner of the room rang again. This time, the person said nothing. They just looked at the screen, then at Adrian with an expression that even Lena, who didn't belong to this world, understood immediately. The problem is bigger than they think. Adrian turned toward Lena. His face was completely closed off. Nothing she had seen before. No more cracks, no more signs of hurt. Just him. The real Adrian Kwon, the man who had built an empire by never letting emotion override strategy. The car behind, he said to the 2 men. Then he looked at Lena. You come with me. Are not. Lena, no. She didn't back down. I'm not going anywhere with you again. Never. One of the 2 men walked towards her. Zara stood up, not to run, but to position herself between the man and Lena, her best friend's instincts running wild. Don't touch her. Zara Quinn's voice was unusually normal, not shaky, simply not. The man paused, not because Zara was scary, but because he looked at Adrian for a signal. Adrian stood motionless in the middle of the room. And in that moment when no one moved, no one spoke, when all the options hung in the air-conditioned room of 412, a knock sounded. 3 hours. Hard. Solid. Police, open the door. What happens in the next 40 seconds is not an action movie. No guns were drawn immediately. No one jumped through the windows. It was just Adrian Kwon standing in the middle of room 412, realizing in a heartbeat that all escape routes had just closed simultaneously. Not due to enemy ingenuity, not due to betrayal, not due to anything other than the accumulation of every choice he had made in the last 12 years that had come together here, in this room, this morning. The door was broken into not because Adrian didn't open it, but because in the 3 seconds of silence after the knock, he did nothing. Just stand and look at Lena Vale. Lena looked back, not to look with hatred, not to look with triumph, to look the way of the last person, to clearly see the person before them. Not the man she once believed to be her love, not the enemy she should fear, just a man standing in a gray hotel room with all his power dissolved by 3 knocks on the door. The door is open. Evelyn Hart walked in first, wearing a navy coat, her face expressionless as usual, But in her eyes, there was something Lena recognized as the focus of someone who had waited long enough for this moment and wouldn't waste it. Behind Hart were 4 people, 2 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes officers with badges pinned to their chests. And behind them all, in the doorway, Cassian Rhee stood with a still-stained bruise under his left jaw and an immediate searching gaze, searching for Lena before anything else. She nodded, small. He exhaled. Adrian Kwon. Hart entered the room, her voice firm and not loud. I have an arrest warrant and a search warrant. I request your cooperation. Adrian didn't look at Hart. He was still looking at Lena. And in his eyes at that moment, finally, truly, finally, she saw something he had never allowed himself to show in the 3 years she had been with him. Not love. She no longer harbored any illusions about it, but realization. That the person standing before him now was not the woman he thought he knew, not something obedient and knowing its place. It has never been like that. He just didn't look closely enough to see it. Secondly, one of the plainclothes men said to Adrian's 2 men, "Hands up." One person complied immediately. The other man looked at Adrian, waiting for a signal, as he had done for so many years, waiting for Adrian Kwon to tell him what to do. Adrian said nothing. For the first time, perhaps in his entire career, Adrian Kwon didn't know what to say. "Hands up," the man in plainclothes repeated, his voice no louder but firmer. The second man slowly raised his hand. Hart walked up to Adrian. "You have the right to remain silent." "I know my rights," Adrian said. For the first time, his voice sounded real, not like a carefully constructed character. Tired. Just tired. Handcuffs were locked around his wrists. Lena looked. She didn't turn away. She had turned away too many times already. Turned away from something hard to see. Turned away to protect herself. Turned away because it was easier than standing and looking straight at it. Not this time. As they led Adrian out of the room, he walked past where she was standing. He paused for a moment. He said nothing. Neither did she. Then he walked away, and the void he left in the room was unlike any void she had ever imagined an ending would leave. Not gentle, not triumphant, not painful in the way she had expected. Just empty. And heavy. And real. Zara stood beside her, saying nothing, simply placing her hand on her arm. Enough. Cassian walked into the room and stood in front of her. He looked down at her face, as if he were checking to see if something was still intact. "Are you okay?" Lena looked up at him. In room 412 of a 4-star hotel on Yanghwa Street in Seoul, the gray light of the morning filtered through the thin curtains and fell onto the floor in long, irregular streaks. In the hallway outside, footsteps and the sound of police radios echoed in. Somewhere in the city, other lives continued, unaware and uncaring about what had just happened in this room. "Not yet," she said truthfully, "but it will be all right." Cassian nodded. He said nothing more. Nothing more needed to be said. Hart approached her, his voice low. "Ms. Vale, I need you to come to the office after." "I know." Lena looked at her. "I'll come. I'll tell you everything." Hart looked at her for a moment, then he nodded. This time not just in acknowledgement. He nodded in the way someone sees something in the face of the person before them and decides to believe it. Lena looked out the window, at the gray wall of the building next door, the morning light not quite sunny, but enough to see everything clearly. Down in Yanghwa Street, Seoul is waking up. And somewhere in this building, Adrian Kwon is being led down the elevator in handcuffs. And the empire he built over 12 years is beginning to crumble piece by piece with every step he takes. But the story, the real story, doesn't end here. Because empires don't fall overnight. They fall apart piece by piece, trial by trial, witness by witness, account by account frozen, door by door locked. And Lena Vale, the woman that man had called a potential replacement, had just begun that part. She turned to look at Cassian and Zara, the only 2 people in the room she could look directly in the eye without preparation, and she took a breath. Enter. Day. For the first time in months, that breath carried nothing that needed to be held back. It's just breathing. It was just her, standing in the gray morning light of Seoul, intact. Not perfect, not unharmed, but intact. And beginning to understand that this wasn't the end of the story. This is where the real story unfolds. The police station in Mapo is nothing special. Long corridors, cold white lights, the smell of stale coffee and papers, notice boards plastered on the walls with faded yellow pins, the sound of a printer somewhere in the distance. People paced back and forth with stacks of files in their hands, as if they had been doing it long enough to no longer think about it. Lena sat in interrogation room number 3 from 9 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. 6 hours. Evelyn Hart sat opposite her for those 6 hours. Not continuously. Sometimes someone else would take her place. Sometimes Hart would go out to take a phone call and then return with a new stack of documents. But most of the time it was Hart, the desk between them, a small tape recorder, and questions ranging from the first day Lena met Adrian Kwon to that morning in room 412. Lena recounted. She didn't tell the story in a way that sounded appealing. She told it the way people tell stories when they've decided not to hold anything back. Every detail, every date she remembered, every word she heard, everything she witnessed. Her voice didn't tremble. It wasn't high. She sat straight and spoke directly. And when she needed to pause for a drink or to make room for a follow-up question, she paused, not filling the silence with anything unnecessary. Hart listened. He took notes. He didn't interrupt unless he needed to clarify a detail. Towards the end, when the story reached room 412 and the scene where Lena watches Adrian leave the room, Hart put down his pen and looked at her. She knew the trial would be long, she said. Not weeks, not months. It could be more than a year before everything is settled. I know. And she will have to testify. Maybe many times. His lawyer will attack everything she says today. I know that too. Hart looked at her for a moment longer. Aren't you afraid? Lena looked down at her hands on the table. Familiar hands. She had seen them holding japchae bags at 11 o'clock at night, gripping the motel bag handles, folding clothes at the laundry shop in Seoul, touching the penthouse door and deciding not to knock. I'm scared, she said truthfully, but I've been scared for 3 years now, and I still go to work every morning. It's easier to be afraid of something specific. Hart nodded. He said nothing more about it. Cassian was waiting in the hallway when Lena came out. He stood by the wall, hands in his pockets, looking down at the floor with the air of someone waiting but not wanting to appear. When he heard the door open, he looked up. They looked at each other. 6 hours, he said. There's a lot to talk about. Are you okay? You've asked that question many times already. Because you haven't answered enough yet. Lena stopped in the middle of the Mapo police station hallway, the cold white lights overhead, the sound of a printer still running somewhere, and looked at Cassian Rhee, the man who had stood outside that room for 6 hours, not allowed in, not allowed to know, just waiting. I'm tired, she said. Really tired. Not just tired today, the tiredness of 3 years combined all at once. He nodded. He didn't say, I understand, or it will be better. He just nodded in the way someone who was genuinely listening. Where is Zara? She asked. The room next door. She just finished too. She's waiting for you. Lena looked toward the end of the hallway. Then she looked back at Cassian. What about you? Did Hart ask you anything? 2 hours. A corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Not a full smile, but something close to it in the most weary way possible. He has plenty of good lawyers. It's not going to be simple. But the USB drive is still intact. Hart transferred copies to 3 separate units before the suspension took effect. He didn't know that. Cassian looked at her. He only knew about 1 copy. Lena paused for a moment. You've done that before. 2 days before we meet Hart for the first time. He didn't tell me. No. He didn't apologize for that. Because if you knew and got caught before everything was finished, you couldn't say something you didn't know. Lena looked at him. There was something in his eyes that was both angry and yet impossible to be angry about because he was right. And that was the most unpleasant thing of all the unpleasant things today. Next time, tell me beforehand, she said. Will there be a next time? The question came out of his mouth calmly, without any hint of pleading or probing. It was simply a genuine question, asked directly in the police station hallway at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Lena looked at him for a moment. I don't know, she said. That was straightforward. But maybe. He nodded. That's enough. For now. Tuss. Zara was standing at the end of the hallway, her coat wrapped around her, even though she was warm enough underneath, holding a cup of coffee from a vending machine that had long since gone cold. When Lena approached, Zara said nothing. She simply opened her hands. Lena stepped into her friend's arms, and for the first time since that rainy night in Seoul, when she knocked on Zara's apartment door in wet clothes and matted hair, she allowed herself to let go of her strength for 10 seconds. Just 10 seconds. Then she stepped back. She looked at Zara. "I'm sorry," she said. "No." Zara shook her head. "I dragged her into this. I was already inside when you knocked on my door in the middle of the night." Zara's voice wasn't angry, not annoyed, just the reality of someone who had made a choice and stood by it. "You didn't drag me in. I chose to." Lena looked at her friend. At that face, a familiar face that had known her even before she knew Adrian Kwon, before she knew this kind of fear, since they were two girls sitting in a university library thinking that life was something to be planned and executed. "I remember you," Lena said. No further explanation. Zara understood. "I miss you too." A pause. "Are you hungry?" "I'm starving." Lena looked at Zara, then at the cold coffee in her friend's hand. Then, for the first time that day, for the first time in longer than she wanted to count, she smiled. Not loudly, not completely, but genuinely. "I'm hungry," she said. But the first trial began 4 months later. It wasn't because the legal system was slow, but because Adrian Kwon's empire didn't collapse in a single day. It crumbled layer by layer as people decided that standing on the losing side was no longer worthwhile. During those 4 months, Lena did things that aren't usually mentioned in stories because they weren't dramatic, but they were as essential as the air. She rented an apartment in Seongbuk-dong, not big, but enough to get morning sunlight and a window overlooking the building's small garden. She paid the rent with her own earnings, from a part-time teaching job at a small language center she found through an advertisement posted on a utility pole. She bought things gradually. Not all at once, like someone trying to fill a space, but one thing at a time as she needed it and when she knew she really wanted it. The first table, then a chair, then a reading lamp. Then, after about 2 months, she bought flowers for the first time. Not because anyone asked, not because anyone was going to visit, just because she walked past a flower shop and saw a small bouquet of white daisies in a box outside the door, and she stopped to look at it and thought she wanted to see that every morning. That was the first time she bought something just because she wanted it, without thinking about what other people would think. She stood in front of the box of chrysanthemums outside the Seongbuk-dong store, and it took her a moment to realize it. Then she bought the flowers and went home. She started seeing a therapist in the second month. It wasn't because anyone asked her to. It wasn't because she was going through an acute crisis, at least not the kind one usually thinks of. It was because Zara, one afternoon sitting in her cafe after it reopened, put her hand on Lena's wrist and said bluntly, "You need to talk to someone other than me." It's not that Zara doesn't want to listen. It's just that some things are too big to be handled with friendship alone. The therapist's name was Park Sun-hee. Her office was small in Mapo, and she sat in a light blue fabric-covered chair. For their first meeting, Lena sat silently for the first 20 minutes, not knowing where to begin. Park Sun-hee didn't rush. She just sat and waited. Finally, Lena said, "I don't know which version of myself is real, the one who lived those 3 years or the one sitting here." Park Sun-hee looked at her. Why do they have to be two different people? Lena thought about that sentence for the entire following week. In the following sessions, she began to speak, not in the manner of a testimony, not day by day, detail by detail, piece by piece, but about what lay beneath it all, about the woman who chose to stay because she believed her love was enough to change something unchangeable, about the nights she stayed awake knowing she wasn't okay, but still got up the next morning and decided to stay another day, about how she had learned to make her face reflect nothing, and about how now, when she no longer needed to, she had to relearn how to be her true self. "Are you afraid to look in the mirror?" Park Sun-hee asked during a meeting. Lena recalled the motel bathroom in Nowon. The mirror had been removed, leaving only a faint rectangular mark on the wall. "Don't be afraid," she said slowly. "It's just, I don't know who will look back at me." And now? She thought it over carefully. She didn't answer quickly just to get it over with. "Now I'm starting to get to know her," she finally said. "Not fully yet, but beginning." The first trial was for money laundering and tax fraud. Not the most serious crimes on the list, but the easiest to prove and sufficient to keep Adrian in custody while the subsequent trials were prepared. Lena sat in the witness stand and looked straight ahead as she read her oath, not glancing at the defendant's area, not because she was afraid, but because she had decided that Adrian Kwon didn't need any more of her attention. She said what she knew. Adrian's lawyer attacked as Hart had predicted, doubting her motives, questioning her relationship with Cassian, attempting to paint a picture of a discarded woman seeking revenge. Lena answered each question in a flat, precise tone, not allowing herself to be swayed by emotion, not letting anger or resentment overshadow the truth. When the lawyer asked one last time, "So you admit that for 3 years you didn't report any illegal activity?" Lena looked straight at him and said, "I admit that I lived in fear for 3 years and learned that silence was a condition for survival in that environment. I acknowledge that, and I am sitting here to rectify that right now." The court fell silent for a brief moment. The lawyer didn't ask any further questions. After the trial, in the hallway of the courthouse, Cassian waited for her, just as he had waited in the police station hallway 4 months earlier. This time, he didn't put his hands in his pockets. He stood tall, shoulders back, watching her walk out. "You did well," he said. "Did you hear that?" she asked, slightly surprised. "Out in the hallway, the sound echoes out." Lena walked over and stood beside him, looking toward the large courthouse doors at the end of the corridor. Heavy wood, brass, the kind of doors designed to remind people that what was happening inside was important. "When will you testify?" she asked. "Next session, in 3 weeks." He looked straight ahead. "It will be worse than yours." "I know." "His lawyer won't go easy on me. I've been by his side for 12 years. I've done a lot." "I know that too." Cassian was silent for a moment. In the corridors of the courthouse, people passed by. Lawyers, witnesses, family members of someone in another courtroom, footsteps and hushed voices forming the background sound of a place where people came to confront what could no longer be avoided. "Are you scared?" Lena asked. Cassian was deep in thought. She knew it because he didn't answer immediately. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was considering what the real answer might be, rather than an answer that sounded good. "I'm scared," he said, "but not scared of the court." "What are you afraid of?" He turned to look at her. "I'm afraid you'll see me sitting in there and hear what I've done and decide that I'm not who you think I am." Lena looked at him. There was nothing artificial in him, no defense, no cover-up. Just the man standing in the hallway of the Seoul Justice Building on a late autumn afternoon, honest in a way that only comes when one is too tired of being dishonest. "Cassian," she said, "I sat in that room for 6 hours and recounted everything I did, everything I knew and didn't say, everything I chose to look away from." She looked him straight in the eye. "Nobody in this story has completely clean hands. The important thing is to sit here and do this." He looked at her for a moment. "You've changed," he said. "Not a judgment, just an observation. Everyone changes when they stop hiding from themselves." A corner of his mouth twitched. This time it was a genuine smile. Not a big one, not a dazzling one, but a real one. "A therapist? Don't mock." "I'm not mocking you." Lena looked at him. Then she looked towards the courthouse door. Then she looked out the hallway window, the golden, long Seoul afternoon sun falling on the buildings and streets in the way of November when the days shorten and the light becomes denser, as if it knew it didn't have much time left and was trying to leave its mark. "Shall we go out for dinner?" she asked. He looked at her. "This time it's not for acting, is it?" "This time it's not for show." As second, third, and fourth court hearings. Cassian sat in the witness stand and spoke of 12 years. Not everything could be said in court, but what could be said, he said, without reservation, without selectively choosing what was to his advantage. Adrian's lawyer attacked as expected, attempting to portray him as the mastermind, the real operator behind Adrian. Cassian didn't refute the accusations with indignation. He answered each question with something much simpler and harder to attack. The simple truth leaves no room for excuses. "Did you engage in any actions that you knew were illegal while working for the defendant?" the lawyer asked. "Yes," Cassian said, "and he didn't report it to the authorities during that time." "Or not." "So how is he different from the defendant?" Cassian paused briefly. Not because there was no answer, but because the right answer needed to be said in the right way. I'm different because I'm sitting here, he said. The defendant isn't sitting here voluntarily. No one laughed in the courtroom, but in the silence after that sentence, there was something heavy and real, something that could be felt without words. Lena did not attend all of the court hearings. She attended the sessions where she needed to be present as a witness. At other sessions, she sat in her classroom at the Seongbuk-dong Language Center and taught English to middle school students, not because it was her dream job, but because in that classroom, with 13 and 14-year-olds trying to learn how to say what they wanted to say. In another language, she found something she couldn't quite name but felt every day. That's almost normal. It's not normal in the sense that nothing happened. It's normal in the sense that life goes on despite what has happened. And the fact that it goes on doesn't mean denying what happened. It just means you're still here. She began enrolling in evening classes, comparative literature, a course at a small university in Seongbuk. She walked from home to class 3 evenings a week through familiar streets, past the corner bakery, past the small park where old people played chess and children rode bicycles. One evening, on her way home from school, she stopped at the park and sat down on a park bench. Not because she was tired, not because she needed to think about anything. It was simply because the Seoul night sky was beautiful in a way she had never noticed before. Not the dazzling lights of the city center, but the soft yellow lights of the residential areas, the lights of ordinary lives unfolding in those houses, the lights of people eating dinner, watching TV, talking, sleeping. She sat there for quite a while, then go home. Adrian Kwon received his full sentence 17 months after his arrest. 20 years. No early release within the first 15 years. The final accusation, about the woman who disappeared 4 years earlier, the witness he removed from the story 3 days before her trial, was the one that made everything else non-negotiable. Evidence from Cassian's USB drive, combined with testimony from 2 people in his organization who chose to switch sides when it became clear which way things were tipping, was enough to rule out any possibility of mitigation. Lena was not present in the courtroom when the verdict was announced. She was at home. In her Seongbuk-dong apartment, the window was open. A fresh bouquet of white daisies sat on the kitchen table, and a cup of coffee was in her hand. Zara called right after the verdict was announced on the news. "Have you heard the news?" "I heard you." A brief silence. "Are you okay?" Lena looked out the window. The small garden of the building below, the ginkgo trees had turned a brilliant yellow in the autumn, their leaves falling slowly in the windless air. A neighbor's child was sitting under the tree picking up leaves. "It's okay," she said, not the everything's settled kind of way. It's okay in a truly literal sense. Zara was silent for a moment. "I want you to know one thing," Zara said. "Today and every other day." "What?" "You're the strongest person I know. Not because you're not afraid, but because you've been afraid 1,000 times and still done what needed to be done." Lena gazed at the bouquet of white daisies on the kitchen table. It was the 7th bouquet since the first one she'd bought from the shop. No one knew it except her. "Thank you," she said. Cassian met her that evening. It wasn't a prearranged meeting. He texted her asking if she wanted to go for a walk, and she said yes, and they met at the end of the street near her house at 7 o'clock in the evening. Seoul in November was cold. Thick coats clung to their shoulders, and their breath formed a fine mist in the air. They walked along the gently sloping streets of Seongbuk-dong, unhurried, without a specific destination in mind. "Did you hear the news?" she asked. "Listen." "How does it feel?" Cassian pondered. She was used to the way he thought before he spoke. Not hesitantly, but honest enough not to want to say anything inaccurate. "It wasn't the kind of relief I was hoping for," he said. "It was relief, but it came with something heavier, 12 years. A lot happened in those 12 years that a sentence can't erase. Nobody said it had to be deletable. No." He looked down at the street ahead. "But people tend to expect the feeling of something being finished to be neater than it actually is." Lena nodded. She understood it in her own way. They walked past the closed bakery, past a small cafe with a few tables occupied, past an old house with warm orange light in the windows and the sound of a television emanating from it. Life went on as usual, without knowing or caring about anything that had happened in room 412, or in the interrogation room, or in the courtroom. "What are you planning to do next?" Lena asked. Not entirely sure, Cassian said truthfully. I'm talking to a lawyer. There might be an agreement with the investigators for cooperating. I'm not sure what it will be like. He looked at her. What about you? Next month I'm starting a second course. I'm thinking about writing my master's thesis on comparative literature. She looked ahead. And I'll continue teaching. I enjoy teaching more than I thought. You're always good at explaining complicated things in a way people can understand. She looked at him. When did you make that comment? From the moment you explained to me why my plan regarding Debongsan's apartment is wrong and how he'll figure it out that way. A corner of his mouth twitched. Clearly and mercilessly. Lena looked at him. In the Seongbuk-dong streetlights, Cassian's face looked different from all the times she'd seen him before. Not because he'd changed physically, but because she was looking at him with nothing else interfering. No fear, no calculation, no question of whether to believe him or not. Just the man walking beside her on a November evening and telling stories with the look of someone who, for the first time in a long time, wasn't on guard. Cassian, she said. What? Thank you. He looked at her. For what specific reason? Because you sat down opposite me in that underground jazz club and didn't say the kind of things people usually say when trying to win someone over. She looked him straight in the eyes. Because you looked at me like a real person. Cassian was silent for a moment, long enough for her to know that the remark had touched something real. You can see it easily when people actually look, he said. The problem is, not everyone is willing to look. Chet. They walked for a little while longer before turning back. There were no grand moments, no words that changed everything. Just two people walking down the gently sloping streets of Seongbuk-dong, their breath creating mist in the cool air, Seoul sparkling below in the way the city always does. Indifferent to anyone in particular, brilliant and noisy and sleepless, as it had been before they were here and would continue to be after they were gone. They stopped in front of Lena's house. Next week? He asked. She thought about her Tuesday evening classes, her Wednesday morning classes, and her Friday appointment with her therapist. Saturday, she said. If you want. Want. She nodded, turned back towards the gate. Stop. Turn around and look at him one more time. You know, she said, I think the worst thing that happened to me wasn't what Adrian did. The worst thing was that I lost myself in it and didn't realize it until I was standing outside that door listening to him. Cassian looked at her. He didn't interrupt. But now, she continued, I think if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't been standing outside that door, hadn't heard that, I would have continued losing myself more slowly and without realizing it. She looked him straight in the eye. That doesn't mean it's a good thing. It just means that sometimes the thing that breaks you is the only thing that makes you look back and see where you stand. Cassian stood in the Seongbuk-dong streetlights, his hands not knowing where to rest. The man who had spent 12 years behind someone else's throne. The man who had held on to the evidence as insurance because there was no other way. The man who sat down opposite a woman in an underground jazz club and decided this was the only thing he could do without shame. I've been behind his throne for 12 years, he said, and I didn't realize he wasn't sitting on his throne. I was sitting underneath, holding it up. He looked at her. It wasn't until you left that I looked back and saw it. Lena looked at him. In the yellow streetlights of Seongbuk-dong, they looked at each other as if they had both been through something significant enough to reshape themselves, not into someone else, but back to the version of themselves that fear, habits, and wrong choices had gradually obscured. Saturday, she repeated. Saturday, he confirmed. She walked through the gate, went up the stairs, opened the apartment door. Inside there was the scent of stale coffee and white daisies. The reading lamp on the desk was still on from the morning. Her master's coursework files lay on the blue fabric-covered chair she'd bought last month. She hung up her coat, went into the kitchen, put the kettle on to boil. Standing by the window while waiting for the water to boil and looking out at the small garden below, the ginkgo tree had lost its leaves, its bare branches blackened by the night, and further in the distance, the never-ending expanse of Seoul's yellow lights. She had once stood in front of Adrian Kwon's penthouse window, gazing at these lights, and imagining herself as a part of that dazzling spectacle. Now she looks at these lights and doesn't think she needs to be a part of them. She just stood there, in her kitchen, in her apartment, with a kettle boiling, a bouquet of white daisies, and her master's thesis papers on the chair. Lena Vale. She's not the woman he calls a replacement, Not the fugitive hiding in cheap motels, not the prime witness in a sensational Seoul lawsuit, not anyone's lover, not anyone's tool, not something to be controlled, owned, or replaced. It was just her. Standing in the kitchen, waiting for the water to boil. The kettle whistled. She poured water into a glass. Walked to the chair, sit down, opened the file. Outside, Seoul continues to live its life. Millions of people neither know nor need to know her story. Millions of lights remain on. Millions of lives unfold simultaneously in the same city. Somewhere in that city, Adrian Kwon sleeps in a windowless room overlooking Seoul. Somewhere in that city, Cassian Rhee walks home down the steep streets of Seongbuk-dong. Somewhere in that city, Zara Quinn closes her cafe, counts her day's earnings, and thinks about tomorrow. And here, in this small apartment, Lena Vale was reading her master's thesis with a cup of hot tea on the table and white daisies in sight, and for the first time in a very long time, nothing tightened in her chest as she sat still. Just peace and quiet. Not perfect, not unharmed, not carrying the burden of what has happened. But it's quiet, and that's enough. Shut. Because there are stories that end in glorious triumph, and stories that end in utter tragedy, and there are stories, the truest ones, the stories of ordinary people living through extraordinary things that end in something quieter than both. By a woman sitting in her apartment in November with a cup of tea and chamomile flowers and a stack of coursework files, and for the first time belonging to herself. No one can take that away from you. Never again.